We're going to do our special new, we have a new segment on this program. It's this. It's our cracker and cheese segment. And our first guest on our new crackers and cheese segment is Hasan Piker. Hello, Hasan. Welcome. Congratulations.
What's going on? I just wanted to say hello from a fellow cracker. From one cracker to another.
We don't have any cheese today. But this is because we didn't do it. But so we do have the crackers. So, dude, you got banned from Twitch.
I sure did. I got a fat 7-day ban from Twitch for my usage of the horrific, racially charged, incendiary, and absolutely unacceptable term, cracker.
Now, listen, I am of the mind that terms of service are the business of these private companies, but there seems to me to be a difference between the N-word and the C-word as...
Are we doing that? We're just going to say the C word?
I mean, we don't know which C word we're talking about because there's other words say with the C word. And the reason why we don't know, really, is because there is not a long history of the use of the term crackers that has been associated with subjugating an entire segment of the population, right? Like, words have a meaning that is invested in them by experience. Words in and of themselves mean nothing. It really is like, you know, some type of established history. But what's your take on that?
Well, I have a lot of takes on that. As a matter of fact, part of the reason why I did get banned is because I would not stop with my takes on this issue. But I'll just say this. If you say the C word and there's like 8 other words that come to mind before cracker, then I'm pretty sure, even if it's a part of the, Webster's dictionary definition of slurs that target a race, it's probably not bad enough that it's ban worthy, which was my point to begin with, because I think that it's capitulating to white fragility and white identity politics, which goes against solidarity among classes. And I think that it's totally silly. And all of the people that freaked out on me on Reddit and on Twitter are now doing touchdown dances and also making fun of how, silly this was. Like, oh man, I'm so glad we banned him for, we got him banned for saying the C word. It's just classic old Gamergate era 4chan style, politics from edgelords.
All right. So, I mean, give me your sense, like, in terms of a term of service. Do you think, like, the N-word should be allowed by Twitch or YouTube? I mean,
no, of course not. No, of course not. I believe that if a word is not associated with historical or contemporary systemic oppression and subjugation, then it's just a slur that isn't as powerful and therefore is not the same. Like, you can apply the blanket terminology of what a slur is, right, to it. And slur is a very powerful word in and of itself. So immediately when you're like, well, that's a slur, that's a racial slur, you're like, whoa, what the fuck? That's crazy. Technically it is. But given the loose definition of what white is, given the etymology of the word cracker itself, and just like you mentioned, how it's devoid of any sort of like tangible and legitimate oppression, both historically and even in contemporary society, it's the same as redneck, hillbilly, Karen, and numerous other kinds of targeted slurs, I guess, pejoratives.
I mean, this is sort of, what my point is when I got fired from MSNBC for using the term rape in a satirical tweet that I did years before. And people were like, there was, and I felt like, no, I mean, MSNBC has the right to fire me if they want to fire me. I mean, it's their company. I thought it was wrong. People came to me and were like, well, how come you're not defending, Jeffrey Lord, who was a CNN guy at the time, who was, I don't know, making Nazi comments. And I'm like, because I don't think his comment was equivalent to mine. There can be a class of things that people can make a determination about And there can be a difference within that class of language. It's not, I don't feel that people should be fired for language one way or another, or they should be banned for language one way or another. It's a function of the instance and the language in and of itself. And in this instance, there is a big difference between the N-word and the cracker word, as it were, because like you say, of the history and the meaning behind, that's what meaning of words means. It doesn't just mean what there's context to it. And, anybody who could read my tweet understood the context in that joke. I wasn't actually saying that I get to choose who rapes my daughter. I was making a satirical point about people trying to apologize essentially for a rapist. And there's context. And, I think Twitch has the ability and YouTube has the ability to decide what their terms of service are. But you can also sort of say, like, they're wrong on certain issues. And they're wrong in this case, as far as I can tell.
And by the way, for the record, I've long been an advocate for the Twitch terms of service. As a matter of fact, it's something that I believe is the reason why that platform is overall a lot better and a lot safer for content creators, even though there are hate raids and whatnot that goes on. And I've said this even though I've gotten, unfairly banned numerous times. Like, for example, when I showed like gore, they considered it to be gore because I was showing Michael Moore's like Bowling for Columbine documentary, when I was describing American imperialism and, all of the war crimes that America engaged in Latin American countries. So despite the fact that I've been on the receiving end of many bans, some worthy, some understandable, Dan Crenshaw, some not so understandable, like the thing I just mentioned, or Cracker, I think that their rigorous application of the terms of service in comparison to other platforms, of course, that's still not like perfect, very difficult job, is the reason why there's a lot less hate speech that goes on Twitch than other platforms and other comparable platforms, like even YouTube. YouTube is working on it too, don't get me wrong, but for the past 10 years when I was working at the Young Turks, and even now, my number one issue with YouTube has always been white supremacist radicalization on the platform and how much white supremacists and Nazis can literally use the platform itself. Twitch, not so much, because they do ban you, but they go too far. I do still prefer it though.
Yeah, and I think they can make these are situations where I think they could revisit and sort of get a better and more sophisticated understanding of what's going on. I mean, it's not like these are, it's not like bots, right? I mean, these are human beings making these decisions, and human brains have a certain nimbleness that an algorithm theoretically does not have. And a human brain can say the term cracker just does not mean and have the same implications as the N-word in this country, even though they are both, racial insults or slurs. And I would think that someone would have the nimbleness of mind to make that distinction. But
no, I agree. The problem is that there is a lot of outrage that you can almost mathematically create on the internet, right? This is the age-old argument. This is something that people on the internet that love doing debates, a lot of the people that call into your show and say, Sam, I don't know, I'm a libertarian. Like, those are the same dudes who, on the one hand, love arguing about being able to say the N-word as a white guy, and then on the other hand, love talking about white fragility and how white people are actually oppressed. And white people are oppressed, just not on the virtue of being white. There's no historical oppression or contemporary oppression attached to being white. That doesn't mean you're not oppressed if you're not, if you're gay, if you are, a member of the LGBT community, you can be marginalized in different ways as a white man, right? But, and most importantly, and most significantly, in my opinion, on the virtue of your class, if you're poor, you were born into a poorer family, if you're destined to be a worker for the rest of your life, then yes, you are going to experience a fuckload of alienation, a fuckload of oppression. But that's not because you're white. And I stress that regularly, but that's a really difficult concept for people who've grown up with liberal politics to comprehend. And unfortunately, oppressors and people who are in the dominant group regularly will use these sorts of liberal institutions and their liberal understandings of certain concepts to, get their way. They can say, cracker really offends me. I'm a white guy, and then actually get their way, while simultaneously laughing about it and saying the N-word, even when they're attacking people for saying the word cracker.
What is your overall perspective on this idea of the deplatforming and that type of stuff? Just generally, I'm curious as to that, because that has been like an ongoing debate that we've had on this program, I think, for years. The idea of like nationalizing these platforms, or in my opinion, we should be breaking up these tech monopolies so that the implications of getting deplatformed from any given one are not so huge.
So we're fully in agreement that destroying these tech monopolies is the best possible way to go. I hate the monopolization of every sector of the American economy. Shouts out to Ronald Reagan. But as far as deplatforming, I do think it's a very successful method of stopping harmful ideas from spreading. I understand that when we start talking about like who gets to make that decision, and that's terrible. Yeah, these platforms demonstrably make bad decisions on a regular basis on these issues. So I guess you're right. Breaking up these tech monopolies would at the very least like kind of divvy up that power a little bit, so you could go somewhere else and you're not just like relegated to BitChute or something, even though those are usually the Nazis and shit that go there. But no, deplatforming I think can be completely understandable, completely reasonable, and successful. Radicalization is a real thing. Stochastic terror is a real thing. These are real concepts. Is the FBI using like a loose terminology for it, or are they actually actively pursuing like some people that they declare white supremacists? Certainly. Will it ever turn into the post-Patriot Act world in which like how Muslims were targeted? Most likely not. Spencer Ackerman talks about this extensively in Reign of Terror. I think deplatforming works, and it can be viable, and it can be appropriate. And most people, unless they have like a Noam Chomsky style approach, or I guess Glenn Greenwald can't really consider him to be principled anymore, but like a Noam Chomsky style approach, if you're a free speech absolutist, that's one thing. But the overwhelming majority of people understand that there are boundaries to free speech. There are boundaries to free speech in the sense that even in America, which has the most liberal free speech rules, right? There are still boundaries on what you can and can't say. And I think those boundaries are appropriate for society to function. And I think hate speech should be part of those boundaries. Absolutely.
And we should say, I mean, I don't know that, and maybe again with Chomsky, it may be different, but the absolutists, when it comes to free speech, I don't think would be in favor. I mean, certainly not Glenn, with his libertarian leanings, would be happy with the government essentially regulating that these private corporations should allow for no terms of service. I mean, starts getting
that has never happened, and that will never happen.
Of course,
when you have no terms of service, you turn into Gab or you turn into Parler, which ironically still do have a terms of service. And also those platforms become hotbeds for pedophiles, Nazis, and in a lot of instances, pedophile Nazis. So, and also liberals don't want to frequent those platforms. So even Republicans and conservatives that want to own the libs don't like going to those platforms anymore, because then there's no libs to own there.
Exactly.
Just a bunch of pedophile Nazis talking to one another about the white race. And that gets really boring after a while, right? You have to be really invested in racism to enjoy those platforms.
That shows how people are the problem with free speech, right? Like, that thing about like nobody wants to go to Gab because like it's all Nazis. Like no normal person would go there. Like we think about going there just for like the confrontation, maybe.
Right.
But like, yeah. They're not. They aren't compatible for free speech, no matter how much they cry about how much they're the real defenders of it, while they are happy when you get banned from Twitch, for instance.
Well, one of the problems is there is no innovation in the white supremacy sector these days. They are not coming up with new theories. It is just they just keep playing the hits over and over again. There's just
why fix it if it ain't broke, Sam?
Exactly. Well, all right. So I don't know. I mean, if there's, you're going to be back on Twitch in what, like a couple of days? How many days do they give you a timeout for?
7.
7 days. That's how long?
Which is like a lot longer than like most bans. It's like the second long. I mean, there's perma, there's a 30-day ban, and then there's a 7-day ban. but most bans are usually around like a 1-day or 3-day bans. You can appeal it, but I don't think they're gonna allow me to.
Yeah, a 3-day ban. I'm just curious as to like the cracker infringement, and of course, when I say cracker, I'm talking about crackers, but
Yeah, of course.
crackers infringement. Where does that, like, what would you do to get a 2-day ban on Twitch, and what would you do to get a 30-day ban? I'm just curious as to where that falls in the spectrum.
I can't say, because this is a part of the process that they basically keep a complete secret. I don't know who any of the moderators on that team specifically are. We never know. People at Twitch that work within the company, I think in some instances, don't even know. So it's like a group of people that, you know, are basically the gatekeepers, and usually they do a pretty good job. Like, don't get me wrong, I am understanding of what they have to do. I do think that the cracker discourse is a unique one, because it's one that you can very easily use against liberals, right? Especially, this is like BDS, right? Like, people love white supremacists. And people who are engaging in white identity politics, whether they are white supremacists themselves or not, regularly utilize marginalized groups and their rhetoric effectively to dominate the conversation and to create oppression for themselves, to create a victimhood narrative for themselves. That's why you got the All Lives Matter to the Black Lives Matter. That's why, you know, you have the pro-lifers to the pro-choicers, right? Like, they're not saying we're pro forcing your pregnancy to term. They're saying they're pro-life. That's why you have Blue Lives Matter. So they're very effective at using liberal academic language in a cynical capacity to kind of win over liberals in the margins who may or may not have been, I don't know, captivated by, or at the very least, like, nurtured into believing certain white supremacist values growing up in a country like America. America is very racist, and all of our institutions churn out that information, whether it is white supremacists through omission, like not educating people on certain concepts, or overtly white supremacists by saying stuff like, you know, the Civil War was the war of northern aggression. You know, that these are all very profoundly important ways in which people are educated to recognize white plight and white oppression as a unique struggle, whether they recognize it or not. And this impacts not just white people, but even black people, even you know, black and brown people that grow up within this education system are going to sympathize with some of these values, because it's the dominant attitude.
I mean, I think to some extent that's what's going on with this, you know, anti-CRT in the classrooms thing. I mean, and it's starting to, it's an attempt to sort of create this notion that white people are being victimized by both mischaracterizing critical race theory and lying about where it's being taught, for that matter. Frankly, I would like to see it in the, you know, I think you could probably develop a program that would be appropriate for elementary school kids. It would be important. It's interesting, too. I think that there is what's fascinating is that you're starting to see now, coming out of this anti-CRT stuff, I think it was something in the American Conservative I read that was essentially trying to reestablish the Dunning School, which is the sort of prevalent historical interpretation of Reconstruction, trying to reassert that, because they're now claiming it is wrong to reprint, I think, Du Bois's Reconstruction, the book. They're complaining about this now. I mean, this is where it's traveling to, right? Like
Oh yeah, it's always going to expand, because it's never going to end with cracker. It's a ridiculous take regardless. As long as you continue recognizing this as like a unique form of oppression, and that's very real, as long as you make white identitarians feel valid about their plight, even if they are totally antagonizing and totally creating a false victimhood narrative deliberately and cynically, they will continue to make gains. And you see it. Like, that's how we got to Charlottesville. Like, you give them an inch and they take a mile. Ultimately, I suspect, like, you know, calling someone a Nazi, for example, you could totally make the argument that this is a racially charged term. I mean, this is, most of the time it's being used towards white people. And I think it's oppressive. I wasn't a part of the, you know, Nazi party in 1938. That's ridiculous that you're calling me, a white person, a Nazi. I think you should be banned for it. You know, there's the endless opportunity there.
And again, the issue is just sort of, you know, context matters. The most weaponized I remember cracker ever being used in my lifetime was on episodes of, I think, The Jeffersons against the neighbors who would come by. But they were all actors, and it was a sitcom, and they were all paid, and it was just written in the dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I personally have never met, and I myself have been called cracker many times, going after like different fandoms. Shouts out to the Barbs out there. If you're watching, Sam, I've been called a cracker many times, many times. Definitely more times than most of the people crying about being called a cracker on the internet. Doesn't matter. It's a ridiculous thing. It's not dehumanizing. It's not. It's not associated with any sort of like serious oppression.
All right, man. Well, listen. I guess enjoy your vacation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna keep making content. Like, they're not gonna. It's really annoying because the ban is like really rigorous. Really, like, you can't appear on anyone else's streams. You can't, like, basically limits you from hanging out with your friends and your coworkers, which is understandable.
Are you not allowed to see family members?
No, I can see my family members. Yeah, my mom and dad are here right now. They're staying with me, but I'm still gonna keep trucking away.
Over when they heard about the ban?
No, they loved it. They were like, "Oh, great! Like, then we will be able to go and vacation." I was like, "Absolutely not."
All right. Well, hang in there. Thanks for coming on. It was good to.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
All right. We'll talk to you later.